In 2004, one of the greatest teams in football history walked onto the pitch, expecting to finish the job, AC Milan. A team filled with legends, Maldini, Kaká, Shevchenko. They had already won the first leg, they were supposed to go through. Everything about that night felt predictable, routine even. But football doesn't always follow logic, because what happened next, no one saw coming. That night, a small club from Spain didn't just win, they dismantled them. 4 goals and no reply. And for a moment, the entire football world stood still, trying to understand what it just had witnessed. Because this wasn't supposed to happen, not to AC Milan, not on a Champions League night, and suddenly one question echoed across the whole of Europe. Who is Deportivo La Coruña? But maybe the most surprising part of this story is not what Deportivo did that night, it's what happened after. Welcome to Hidden Club Stories, where every club carries a story. This is the story of Deportivo La Coruña. This video is sponsored by Hidden Shirt Club. They sell premium football shirt mystery boxes with real stories. If you wanna discover your own story, you can use code TRIFINO10 at checkout. Long before that famous night, Deportivo La Coruña was not a name that carried weight in European football. They are a club from Galicia in the northwest of Spain, far away from the spotlight that surrounded Madrid and Barcelona. A coastal city shaped by the Atlantic. A region with its own identity, its own rhythm, its own pride. Football here didn't feel like spectacle, it felt local, grounded and personal. For decades, Deportivo lived in the shadow of Spain's giants. They moved between divisions, rarely threatening the established order. There was no expectation of greatness, no sense that this club would one day challenge Europe's elite. But in the early 1990s, something began to change. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily, Deportivo started building something different. A team that wasn't meant to dominate, but refused to accept its place. And slowly, La Coruña began to believe. By the mid-90s, Deportivo had transformed into something Spain had not seen coming. They were no longer just competing, they were challenging. Led by players like Bebeto and Moura Silva, the club developed an identity built on intelligence, balance and belief. They didn't overpower opponents, they outplayed them. The city followed. The Riazor Stadium became a fortress, filled with a kind of energy that didn't come from expectation, but from possibility. Deportivo weren't supposed to win La Liga, but yet, in the 99-2000 season, they did exactly that. Breaking the dominance of Real Madrid and Barcelona, they became champions of Spain. It wasn't just a title, it was a statement. That a club from the edge of the country could rise to the very top without losing its identity. And as a new century began, Deportivo didn't fade, they evolved. As European football entered a new era of money and global attention, Deportivo La Coruña found themselves in a rare position. They were not the richest, not the most famous, but they were good enough to belong. Season after season, they faced teams built with far greater resources, and yet, they held their ground. In the Champions League, they didn't play like outsiders, they played like equals. There was a calmness to their football, a belief that they deserved to be there. And then came 2004. A quarter-final against AC Milan, a team that represented everything modern football was becoming. Powerful, global and dominant. The first leg ended in 4-1 for Milan. For most teams, that would have been the end. But Deportivo didn't approach the second leg like a lost cause, they approached it like an opportunity. What followed was not just a comeback, it was a moment that would define them forever. After 2004, the landscape of football began to change. Money became important, structures became more complex, margins became smaller. Clubs like Deportivo, built on balance and smart decisions, started to feel the pressure. Keeping top players became harder, but replacing them became even harder. The system was shifting, and Deportivo were no longer moving with it. At first, the decline was subtle. A few weaker seasons, a few missed opportunities. But over time, those small changes began to accumulate. The club that once challenged giants was now struggling to keep up. By 2010, the fall was no longer gradual, it was visible. Relegations came, promotions followed, but never with stability. Financial problems started to surface, decisions became reactive instead of strategic, and slowly, Deportivo La Coruña slipped away from the level where they once belonged. From La Liga champions to a club fighting just to stay relevant. For many outside Spain, they disappeared. Not completely, but enough to become a memory rather than a presence. Today, Deportivo La Coruña exists in a very different way. At this moment, they are playing in the second division of Spanish football. The spotlight has gone, the expectations are lower, and the margins are smaller. But the club is still there. They are still playing, still supported, still remembered. In La Coruña, the past is not something distant, it is something that lives alongside the present. Fans still talking about the night in 2004, not as nostalgia, but as proof. Proof of what this club once was, and maybe what it could be again. Because football has a way of bringing stories back when you least expect it. Deportivo La Coruña's story is not unique. Football is full of clubs that rise, peak, and fall. But what makes this story different is how unexpected that rise was. A club from the edge of Spain, a team that wasn't built to dominate, and yet, for a moment, they stood at the top of European football and refused to be ignored. In the end, they lost the semi-final to Porto, but still, this was an incredible journey for a team like Deportivo de La Coruña. They didn't just compete, they made history. And even if the world has moved on, even if the spotlight now shines elsewhere, that night still exists. 4 goals and no replies of European giant. A reminder that in football, nothing is guaranteed. Not success, not dominance, not even survival. Only moments. And some moments are enough to last forever. Thank you for watching this episode of Hidden Club Stories. If you want to discover more clubs with identity, history and soul, make sure to subscribe. Because somewhere out there, another story is already waiting.